This episode is supported by Spa True Clinics. Listeners, I am 39 years old, and I have never looked or felt better than I do this year, and I owe so much of that to Spa True Clinics and Dr. Stephen Jones. 2021 and 2022, if it had taught me anything, it was that I am worth investing in. My health and wellness is worth every single penny. And this month, because Spa True Clinics already knows the truth that you're worth investing in, they are giving us this fantastic deals on microneedling, Venus-free skin tightening, and the coolest way to lose those fat areas, literally, cool sculpting. Microneedling is used to help reduce the appearance of pores, fine lines, and wrinkles, while the Venus-free skin tightening gives you a firmer, smoother skin that looks and feels noticeably more youthful. So, to book your complimentary consult and cash in on these outrageous savings today, contact Spa True Clinics toll-free at 1-844-477-2878 or email them today at info@spatru.com. We are back and we are coming in hot, dear listeners. And with us, we have a force of nature, a guest that became a friend, Jocelyn M Kirkland. Now, Jocelyn Kirkland is an author, master educator, and licensed cosmetologist with a passion for helping people to look, feel, and live their best lives. Jocelyn obtained her Bachelor of Arts degree in Education and Master of Arts degree in Teaching and Curriculum from Michigan State University. And you guys, if the topic of sex intrigues, fascinates, repels, or confuses you, I want you to take in a deep breath and give yourself permission to sit down and enjoy the next 90 minutes. You are going to want to find time to listen to this episode. It is full. It is the complexity and unraveling of inner truth and intimacy. We discuss language. In this episode, we create a new connection, and we also tackle the values and the wisdoms, the right to arrive at the truth and to build a foundation that suits your narrative while also inspiring you to feel empowered to tap into your own body's wisdom. Now, I'm not going to lie, you guys, just when you think that we are saying goodbye at the end of this episode, don't turn off your listening device because, well, we stop and then we hit rewind and we dig even deeper because Jocelyn's just the shit. She is so cool, and I am just so excited that she gets to come on this podcast and connect with all of you and that you guys get to connect with her. So as per usual, you'll be able to find all of her links in my Instagram bio and on the website. I'm getting that up and going again. We took a break, but we're back, and we are so beyond joyful to be here. Good morning. Jocelyn Kirkland is in the house today. I am so excited. I literally feel like jumping and shouting on this bed that I've got my pillow fort set up on. But I would knock over my coffee if that happened because y'all, it is 5:30 a.m. We are getting this done. We're just so happy to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So, Jocelyn, listeners, I met Jocelyn on Clubhouse, which I've been off of Clubhouse for about as long as I have kind of been taking a break from podcasting. And
girl, you just opened up your mouth and you just started spilling out all of this amazing, fantastic lived experience, leadership. It was amazing. And the first thing I did is I was just like, please come on the podcast. Like, I don't know anything about you, but I just love your vibe. I love what you're saying. And I mean, you were talking about my favorite conversation, which is sex and the human body and female pleasure. And I couldn't not fall in love with you right then, right there. I was like, woman crush Wednesday all day, every day.
Oh my goodness.
Jocelyn, please, please, please give us your story, your hero story, your story of origin. Like, just tell us, where are you from and what are you up to?
Okay. Well, I'm from Detroit, Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and I have lived in America all my life. I've been to Houston and New York and Chicago, and now I'm on my way to LA. So big city living.
Wow. What are you going to LA for?
Well, my husband's an actor.
Okay.
So, LA is the place to be. And now that I've written my book and I'm, starting my career with coaching, and I'm also a teacher, I'm just a bag full of lots of things.
Love
So
it.
that's actually part of what makes my, discussing sex and anatomy and just my lived experience really unique, because for the past decade, I've been teaching children. So I've gotten really used to sharing information, first understanding or seeking knowledge, and then discovering different ways to communicate those things. So I've learned a lot about the human psyche, about what makes people learn, what prevents them from learning, what other barriers they experience in their learning to perhaps enhance it. And in terms of sex, all that stuff is either absent or thwarted in some kind of way.
I love it.
Yeah, that is who I am in a nutshell. I'm a wife of 8 years, and I have 2 little girls, ages 4 and 1. And I've written a book about conversations about sex.
Oh, and that just has me so excited, because one of my core beliefs about, and of course that we on the podcast, we talk a lot about sex and talk a lot about actionable steps and ways that we can bring about an end to, domestic violence and exploitation and sex trafficking and human trafficking. And I say that where it ends is not with the prosecution and the shaming of buyers, of sex buyers, or anybody. I believe that it begins with education of our children. I believe that it begins with the healing. And if we, I don't know about the United States because I don't live there, so I can't say that this is what's going on down there. But I can say in Canada, there is so much shame, and there's just not enough awareness of our own bodies. There's no, at least for me and the group of people that I grew up with, there wasn't a conversation that was had between parents where it was explained, like, what is consent, and also I think that's a generational thing too. I really do.
Yeah.
You got to remember, I'm 39 now. The generation that I grew up in, the generation previously, like, those weren't the conversations that they were having, and so it's so exciting to me to know that there are people like yourself out there that have not only educated themselves, but you're also helping and creating to educate not only your children, but also the world's children. Like, how fucking thrilling is that?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And even beyond the children, the adults. So
Right?
the adults are the children that didn't learn. So it's
Yeah.
still this taboo around talking about it, or even like this shame around not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
part, like, I had an almost embarrassment or shame toward the fact that I didn't know certain things and I felt like I should. But when I thought about, okay, well, why do I feel like I should? I had no answer. But also, I considered the fact that if I feel this way, if this is my experience, there are a bunch of people out here who perhaps have that same shame and embarrassment about even trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
that also fuels a lot of my mission. And the fact that, like, on this journey, I've made some great strides. where I can hardly be embarrassed or restrained at all because I have so much to share. I know that the information and experiences that I've had will change people's lives. And I'm here for it. Like, I am here to share. If there's a question, I will offer the answer. I will offer my lived experience in hopes of enhancing someone else's life or at least enlightening their perspective.
I love it. Can you tell me, because I just have all these questions floating around in my head, but I really want to get into, I mean, how did you get to where you are? Like, how did you get there? So what was your childhood like? Like, where did the suppression of those questions begin for you, and how did you get to the strength of curiosity?
That's a good question. Okay, so my parents have been married for 39 years. They were 21 when they got married, and they met at church, and they dated since they were about 16 years old. So their love story was very familiar to me because they were my parents and I lived in the house with them. And so a lot of our values, or even just, what they implemented or taught me, came from who they were and what I experienced them as. So in the process of being, raised by Christian parents who were married to each other, who both were my parents, I already had like this foundation set, if you will. Moving forward from there, as I learned about sex and my body, because of my home situation, and then even so, like, I had both sets of my grandparents were also married. And then while I had some aunts and uncles, maybe had gotten divorced or something like that, but like it was very marriage heavy. This one person, love, life, and thereafter. So as a little kid, it's like, oh yeah, grow up, sex, marriage, okay, got it. So then moving into puberty, you start experiencing these things and you get curious, little kissy petty, touchy here or there. Like, I had these experiential moments, but because it felt displaced, because I'm like, this isn't marriage thereafter. This is just me playing around with these kids, like this is us just kind of being nasty or something. Like, so I never really got to a place when I was a child, I would say, that had forward conversation as far as enough to dismantle some of the things that were occurring or even the messages that I was receiving concerning my body and sex and what it is like to be a woman in that conversation, because the conversations that I had had access to were very male dominant. So even as I switched from being a child, I grew up, I become a woman, I became that wife, right? It's like, okay, this is where it's supposed to be. When I was not experiencing what I thought I was supposed to be experiencing, I knew something was wrong. So I was a whole adult married woman. And even through the lenses of my faith, like, okay, this is where sex should be happening. It should be great. And I didn't have orgasms. So I thought my vagina was broken. And I was like, what's going on here? And I discussed it with my husband, and he's like, you're not broken, like, but I knew that there were walls there that I just couldn't explain why they were there. And I also didn't know where to begin to address them. And that is where I was like, well, let me figure this out. And as the educator that I am and always have been, I kind of went through the steps of what was going on in my mind and how that was impacting the lived experience that I was having. Once I had gone through that process intently, just looking at specifically sex and like my knowledge, my body, my feelings, even the spiritual experience that I was having in relation to sex. And I mean, I just dove into that thing. The most common part of that process was conversation with myself, digging into me. So fast forward through that process, I was able to have an orgasm, amen to that. And then along the journey, I became a multi-orgasmic woman.
Woo!
And that part, I know you like that. I know you like that. I didn't even know that was possible. I was happy with my little one. And then it was like, wait, there's more? Oh, wait, I can, okay. So, but then I look back and I'm like, when I was not having them, I did not tell a soul. I didn't
Right.
tell anybody other than my husband, but like, I didn't tell the doctor. It wasn't medical. I didn't tell my friends or my family because I mean, if it were available conversationally with them,
Mm-hmm.
probably would have had that talk prior to getting to that moment of discovery, you know?
Right.
So I just didn't tell anyone. So once I got on the other side of the coin, I was like, oh, yeah, let me go ahead and tell my story and help people. And especially since, even though sex is very personal, my husband fully supported the idea of like sharing my story,
Mm-hmm.
going and helping people, and just like being a liaison between this conversation, So yeah, this is where I am, and that's how I got there.
Oh my gosh, like there are just so many things I want to ask about, I want to bring up. So just bear with me because we're gonna really excavate on this one. So I think one of my first questions is, how big of a role do you think religion played on growing up in a space and not knowing what your body was capable of, or perhaps exploring it in certain ways that you went on to explore it as an adult?
I think it played a pretty big role. Not just religion itself,
Mhm.
but how I chose to implement that in my journey.
Right.
There are a lot of people who are fully engulfed in religion and religious institutions and do whatever they feel like it, like
Mhm.
they're human. And so that in and of itself is just a big bag of whatever. But for me, I I understood the value of the process.
Mhm.
It's very personal. I got that. I got all the scare tactics. You can get pregnant, you can get STD. I had all those things as well. But like realistically, I understood the value of human interaction, how you can meet a person and they can change your life, or how you can meet a person and you can make some choices along the way and it can destroy your life. So because of like the value of meeting people and like community and all of that, I was hyper aware of our role in humanity in connection with one another. When it came to sex, I perceived that as a deeper level. I perceive that as not only a physical action, but a spiritual one in which like both parties interact in a way that you just don't every day.
Mhm.
It's not a handshake or a smile in the street. It's something more hidden. Like it's something hushed. We don't necessarily talk about it. It was for the darkness, or it was for like private times. And so because I didn't have like access to what sex truly was, first through experience, but secondly, just through all the layers that, were within it.
Mhm.
When it comes to religion, there was nothing to really connect. All you have is like a few scriptures, like, it's between husband and wife, or don't do it, or somebody's
Yeah.
concubine somewhere, but like, you don't necessarily talk about it. So even in writing my book, is truly a facilitator of conversation in order to further define what your goals are, be it enhancing the actual experience or preserving yourself to not have the experience, whatever the case may be. I found that the common thread is just, okay, how do we communicate about it instead of just not?
No, I love what you just said there because that actually brings it right into my second question, which it has to do with demonstration. And so,
Mhm.
I can't speak for you, but for myself, I always bring up the word demonstration. What are we demonstrating for the world's children?
Yeah, that's good.
And what did our parents demonstrate? Because there's so much, there can be some
Mhm.
shame and some toxic feelings around sex, and that it should be private and that it should be kept behind doors. And I noticed a lot, even at the age I'm at now, and also when I was a child, that I was witness to a lot of fighting, witness
Mm.
to a lot of fighting, but I wasn't witness to the making up of the fights. I wasn't witness
Yeah,
to the
that's good.
love. I wasn't
Mhm.
witness to the intimacy growing up as a child, because that was thought to be kept behind closed doors. So
Mhm.
what was that like for you? Was that love demonstrated, or is that part of what kept it, so quiet and unavailable to you?
That That's a great question. So the love was available, but not in a way that would connect to sex.
Mhm.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Like I
Yeah.
saw lots of things, but when it comes down to like even just foreplay, not in like a physical sense, but like the flirting and all that, that wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily the part that was demonstrated. So I did see it, but in on TV, you
Mhm.
know, like
Yeah.
in the movies, you know, right before the sex scene or on the date,
Yeah.
or if I saw it with other people, I still processed it differently according to who they were to me and what I perceived their connection as. And that kind of told me like to consider their interaction either appropriate or not, you know, like or
Yeah.
forbidden or not, you know. So I did experience the love, but the kind of love that I was seeing didn't lead to sex because sex was completely disjointed from that. So yeah, no, I saw that, but yeah, definitely not connected to um, the mission.
No, for real. And I think that that's something, and I talk about this quite a bit. I'm a voracious reader. And so, one of the things that I read about in multiple studies has to do with the way that children learn. And so when babies are born, when I was growing up, people thought that, oh, they'll never remember that. Kids are dumb. They won't remember that. So we do whatever we want, talk about whatever we want. Um, and whereas children, the way that children learn when they're, after they've been born, even in utero, everything's uploaded into like the reptilian part of the brain. It's where what you're learning is through what you're seeing, not through what you're hearing, because you haven't developed that language skill yet. Right. And that's
Mhm.
what starts to lay these pathways in the brain that will play out when we're adults, because that's how we upload social construct, because it would be verbally too much as a child to learn it. So we learn it through watching, through demonstration. And when we're children, if what we're seeing is not loving, interacting relationships, or intimacy, how do we replicate that as adults when it's something that we didn't see as children, and then it's something that we learn about only when we start hitting puberty ourselves and we go in search of it in all the wrong places, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that demonstration portion, that is the key.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we need to further explore because even, as puberty hits and once children do develop that language, like you have that experience portion where they just observe. By the time they're available to have the conversation, if it is hindered or um, imbalanced in a way, then they have to navigate it the best way they can. And by then, they've already had the conversation. Like the places that are supposed to be instilling values and instilling safety and knowledge into children. If they're not the ones talking about sex, those children are learning from other places.
Mm-hmm.
Even at the beginning of writing Complexities of Ecstacy, one of my goals was to have 100 conversations with 100 different women just about sex. So I had my little interview questions prepared. And then as I got going with these interviews, I was able to just scrap my questions and just go for it. And just, so let's just talk about sex. And we would go and every single woman walked me through their journey. And every single woman ended up sharing more than what she thought that she would. And one of my initial questions was, have you ever, or, have you ever experienced, or do you know someone personally who experienced sexual assault? That was it at first.
Yeah.
And then that question slowly transitioned to at what age?
Mm.
Because you find, or at least I found, that every single woman had experienced some kind of sexual assault by the time they were an adult having this interview with me. Some
Absolutely.
in extreme cases, such as, rape and violence, while others, it may have been nuanced in unwelcome touch or grooming to prepare for that. But
Mhm.
every single person had experienced that. So when you think of children, while we are thinking, okay, well, they may not be able to have the conversation. They may not be mature yet. Maybe they've already been fondled and touched and maybe experienced some things way above what you think they can handle in your conversation.
Oof.
So that is the place where, like, no, we have to catch up. We
Yeah.
have to put this into our schedule of things very early, because if not, they're having it without you.
Oh my goodness. I need to let that sink in for a moment, because that is so powerful. They're
Mhm.
having the conversation without you,
Yep.
even if they can't verbalize it.
Yep. Yep. And we have the power to insert ourselves into that conversation. Like, even with my 4-year-old, I get uncomfortable sometimes if my husband and I kiss a certain way, because she is looking. So he'll grab my face and he'll kiss me. And then here she is. She's grabbing my face. And I'm like, no, don't kiss me. Don't kiss me like that. And so, and even like as I'm talking now, I'm like, oh, we just need to talk about it. Like, no,
Right.
daddy can kiss me that way. We're not going to hide that kiss. It's not like we're just,
Yeah.
slapping out all the stuff. But in the same way, she needs to be exposed to that conversation that way. A loving, passionate kiss by mom and dad. You just don't grab mommy and kiss me that way. It's a little different. Oh, it's different. Okay. Like, she can handle that.
As they'd be like, girl, I remember the first time I slipped my mother some tongue.
Girl. And and even the 1-year-old, they are watching. You know what I'm saying? They're observing. Like, so
They're like little owls. Just like
they are, and they're everywhere. It's no getting away from them. But that is part of the conversation, right? Even if we're not necessarily discussing it, they can differentiate. Mommy doesn't kiss anyone else like that. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Just like having those things of like inserting yourself in the conversation because you are a part of the conversation. And if you're not saying, hey, let's talk about it, you are alternately saying, let's not. You're either contributing to the forward progression of the conversation or directly contributing to the silence. There is no in between.
Oh, I love that you brought that up. My beautiful friend, January, she says that silence was her first pimp, or her first exploiter, rather, maybe.
Yeah.
And that always hit home for me. What you said just really just backed that up and resonated with it.
Yep. That's chapter 1. It's called Penetrating Silence.
Ooh, let's talk about that. Penetrating silence. Let's get into your book. Let's go there, because now I got the chills, girl. All right. So your book, the name of it is?
The name of the book is Complexities of Ecstacy. And the subtitle is Debunking the Taboo Nature of Conversations About Sex.
Now, you got into teaching. So did you, because you were a teacher first and you taught children.
Yes.
Did you go into school, like that was a passion of yours as a child?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I always have wanted to be a teacher. At the age of 3, my parents got me a little chalkboard and easel. And that was a gift I got for Christmas. And I was like, oh, I just got hired. Like, that was my job. So I taught teddy bears. I taught my friends, the neighborhood children, my little cousins. Like, I was a teacher through and through. And then even as I got older, it still was my thing. Like, my first job was at a daycare center because it was local. So I could walk there, even before I got my license or driver's license. And I would just walk over there, and I was a quote unquote teacher. I was like a little helper. But then over the years, I graduated to kind of that teacher status while I was still in high school. So yeah, I've always wanted to be a teacher. And then after I became a teacher, then that is where I'm like, okay, helping people understand. So then I started working with other teachers, teaching them how to teach and strengthening my skill set as far as, okay, what goes into helping other people get it. So in writing my book, even like this past school year was my last year in the classroom. And I was like, oh, how do I do both? I didn't want my students to like hear all the sex talk stuff on the internet, although they did find me. But even the fact that I was even thinking about that as if it was something wrong, that also plays into this whole topic that like, we should have it. We should normalize conversations about sex, not to encourage people to do it or not to, but we should talk about it. Like, I'm not a millionaire, but that didn't stop people from giving me advice about money or discussing other people's journeys with their money. You know, it didn't move me either way. And like, I'm still in my current position, but I have lots of access to financial talk, you know? So
No, I love where this is going, because one of the conversations that's being had right now is this not even a conversation, it's more like a war. There's a war against porn at this very moment in time, especially within the human trafficking organization sector. And I'm so curious about, you know, the way that your book approaches, and the way that your teaching approach, in combination with, again, like what we were talking about, like if you're not having the conversation with your kids, then they're going to be learning it from somewhere else. And I don't advocate that porn is bad. I think that porn, in the right context, in the right situation, between two people that are consensual, you know, again, you do you, right? But I wonder about, what do you think about porn and our children learning from that, and or exploring or going into that?
That's a really good question. So porn is right now the number one teacher of sex in the world. And the most interesting thing about that is it doesn't have to prove itself. It is manifest by several different layers. And like you said, between two consenting adults, like all these parts that would make the demonstration of the acts be or perceived a little bit differently. The problem for me is that it is not always by consenting adults.
That's right.
The industry itself, like trafficking is a thing. Like there are situations where, because we don't talk about sex, the exploitation within the industry,
Yes,
behind the scenes, that's not a part of the conversation. So what we have is just basically the teaching and further perpetuation of the silence without the access to engage with it in a way that makes sense for the individual layers of life. We have culture, we have religious and spiritual values and differences, and even the interaction and what that means for both parties. You know, we have power structure, like all these things come into it. So with porn, I find that everybody's influenced. If you're not watching it, you're interacting with someone who has. So their idea of what sex should be like or what it should look like is being influenced by this portrayal. Now, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The lights, the sound, the whole production of it is not just in truth and moment. It is a production. So if this is the teacher, then it removes the humanity from the process and it focuses a lot more on the show, because that's what is being consumed. That is what the money is flowing from. So while, you know, people choose what they want to indulge in, Lord knows all the stuff that we indulge in just media in general may not necessarily be conducive to our collective growth or even our well-being. But everyone has the opportunity to choose what they, indulge in. So as far as being a healthy conversational component, I find that porn has contorted the conversation to what things should be and look like. And so it's hindered some of the authentic possibilities, because it's the stuff that looks good on camera may not necessarily be what works for you. But if you've never seen it, or if this is what you've commonly seen, you may not necessarily have access to the parts of it that you should have access to, or how you should be able to look at it or receive it. So yeah, that's my long drawn out answer. But
No, it wasn't long drawn out at all. It was full of just absolute wisdom bombs. And did you ever see, for those of you who don't know, it's my understanding that the back of, or I should say porn, was raised up on the back of Linda Lovelace. Did you ever watch the movie with I think it's pronounced Seyfried?
no.
That it's called Lovelace.
But I'm gonna watch it
Oh,
after this.
it was so, you're gonna have to check this one out. It was really an incredible movie because they did two parts of it. And in the first part of the movie, they show you what the public saw. They show you that there was a woman who was sexually free, who was undaunting in her pursuit of climax and sexual, liberation. And then in the second part of the movie, they show you what she wrote about in her biography, which
Hmm.
was the abuse, which was how she was actually
Okay.
forced into pornography and she was captured and kept by her husband and ultimately just berated and I keep going back to that word abuse, but that's all there is for it, and so
Mhm.
there's two sides to porn. There's what you see, what's being projected, what the world wants you to see or the industry wants you to see or a particular individual wants you to see, and then there's always a story behind it, and how
Absolutely.
the movie was really cool in a way because it showed you the way in which everybody was complicit um, and contributed to her rise to stardom as the very first big screen porn star. And
Mm.
yet, what was taking place behind the scenes for her that she couldn't speak out about, and so now as we move into the Me Too era and the We Believe Our Children era, you
Okay.
know, um, the movie, I think a lot more people are going to be open to recognizing that she really did experience what she said she did. Whereas there was so much disbelief and
Mhm. That was her
dismissal.
experience.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I really recommend. I think that the movie was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. So I recommend that parents watch that because,
Yeah. What's the
yeah,
name of it again?
I believe it's called Lovelace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really
I'm
good.
definitely going to watch that. I think so. Here's the component of it that I think will bring it all together. As a woman of faith, and
Mhm.
like everybody's journey is different, which I totally respect because you have the right to choose your own thing. And so sometimes we try to impress our own values on other people. And already that's a block sometimes because it doesn't acknowledge our individuality, like even
Mhm.
whether I choose to join you or agree, like give me the right to arrive there with you instead of forcing your way onto me. What I do know across all walks of life, love tends to be one of our key goals here.
Mhm.
Love and truth. Even like where science and religion conflict, I have no problem with science if it's true. Like
Mhm.
theories are theories, but if it's true, like that doesn't conflict with religion. They walk hand in hand, you know?
Mhm.
So with porn, and even you mentioning like, Amanda's experience, that truth is not what's being displayed. And if this is the foundation of my faith, or if this is the foundation of a lot of people's morals and values, that truth component and that love component, that is the key. If the woman is the one that is on the screen and it's like, oh, she's empowered, oh, she's having a great time, and then she is the person that like gets all the shine from it, and she speaks of her abuse, or
Mhm.
she speaks of the fact that like, no, the power that I display is not the lived experience, that's a point of conversation, because people look at her story and her performance and even the production of it and may perhaps use that as a speaking point.
Mhm.
Oh, look at what it can look like. This is what it is. It's not bad. Look. And then she's like, yeah, but this is what it really was.
Mm.
That changes things. That is a part of the conversation that we do not have. We don't have documentaries during the shots. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She's not the one directing. Like, we very much have a one-sided kind of angle that is loudest. You know what I'm saying? It's not a
Mhm.
balanced conversation. Even in the most liberated of circles, there's still this idea of patriarchy or even male dominated conversation that goes before us concerning sex. So to have a woman pull up a chair or even have a voice in the conversation in a very loud way, especially in circles of faith, but not limited to, like, this is where the conversation gets really interesting because, okay, where do we start? you know?
Yeah. Well, and women just in general, due to the misogyny and religion, in all honesty, women had no rights over their bodies. And so there was, at the very idea of a woman touching herself and being able to pleasure herself and or an elongated clitoris brought about female genital mutilation. It brought about clitorectomy, and so women, the suppression, and I think that a lot of us forget, we think, oh, well, we're living in the 21st century. And yet we come from a long line of suppression. And that is, they did these studies on mice where they took the pregnant women, or not women, they took the pregnant mice. I don't know what a female mouse is called. And they would shock them. They would play, I think they would play a sound and then they would shock them. And they would do this repetitively until the mouse displayed fear at just the sound, right? And then what happened is when the babies were born, they would play the sound for the babies. And it was discovered that for generations, that sound would make the children and the grandchildren fearful, right? And so that I wonder, and I'm big, I love the conversations about epigenetics and stuff. So, I wonder, like, how bred into us is fear over knowing our own bodies?
Yeah.
So,
I think that's profound because that's also the part of the silence,
right?
that silent fear, like that's absolutely a part of the journey, or even that demonstrated fear. So you don't necessarily know why, but you've seen it and you're very familiar with it, even without being able to explain it.
Yeah. So how do you approach this conversation? How do you start out in your book having conversations like this with your readers, with your children? I mean, take us through your process. How does it begin? Where does it go? And how do you bring it full circle?
Okay, so in my book, I broke it up into 3 parts. The first part is just the declaration that we don't talk about sex enough. So what I found in the conversations that I have conducted is like, you can't just hop out into the middle of the ocean. You know what I'm saying? Like that doesn't make sense. But you can perhaps walk along the coast. You can walk in the sand and look at the water. You can look at other people, having the experience with the water. And then you decide to, okay, put your toe into the water, maybe get your feet wet a little bit, roll your pants up and just get your, feet and ankles. I don't want to go too deep. And then some people may be able to hop into the conversation where you just go ahead and swim. So I wanted to approach the conversation portion delicately while also leaving room for extreme depth. So in that first part, it's just like, we don't talk about it. I talk about, culture, upbringing, the media, how we even got here where we're trained as a society that if you're going to talk about sex, you have to be committed, going in a sex trafficking clubhouse room to talk. You know what I'm saying?
You're swimming with the sharks then.
You know what I'm saying? Going into the sex store. Like, if you're going to talk about sex, you have to work for it. I didn't want the book to be that way. So, like, of course, in true teacher fashion, I have questions. So you can ask you can literally read the question and just answer it for yourself. Like, that is how I went about my journey as far as getting to know myself and enhancing my personal sex life. So one of the main questions I kept coming back to for myself is why? Where did you get that from? Why do you think that? Why do you feel that way? So then in the book, I ask practical questions like, what was your first experience having a direct conversation about sex? Where the reader can sit and think like, oh, grandma told me that's where babies come from. You know what I'm saying? Like, you may, so-and-so told me don't do it. Like, you may, so-and-so touched me here, or this person was looking this way. Like, you find that people giving that direct task or, that ask of them, then they can answer it to themselves. It's also structured in a way where I have sentence stems, again, teacher fashion, when this happened, my first thought was like something like that, where you can start the beginning of the sentence and finish it. And the cool thing is that it's in a non-threatening manner. So this is like the walking along the beach part, where if you're reading it by yourself, great. If you're reading it with other people, you all can choose the depth. So you can skirt around the outside, and then you also can take the question deeper and deeper. Well, why? Well, what happened with that? That's interesting. I had a similar experience, that kind of thing. So that's the first portion. The second portion of the book is we should. This is where it gets interesting. We should talk about sex more because this gives the direct why. A lot of times people just don't. And since you never have, you just continue not to. What's the big idea? Why should I talk about sex more? And that is where I mention sexual abuse and manipulation. I also talk about, the enhancement of your life in general, pleasure, like, kindergarten. We talk about the five senses, how we experience the world around us. Like, we're very aware of our presence in the moment. If you're not aware of your physical presence in your life, then you are intentionally denying part of your lived experience. And that's odd because you are you, So we go into talking about why we should talk about sex, if not for yourself, for other people. You can be abstinent or celibate. You don't have to have the sex, but guarantee you're interacting with people on a regular who are. You need to know the signs of abuse. You need to be able to be equipped to have the conversation when someone is trying to converse with you or very much is in your reach. If you notice certain things, if you hear certain things, but if you're completely blocked off to that conversation, you may miss out on the portions of being active in the communities that you are because you have deliberately decided not to engage in that. And then the last part is what happens when we do have those conversations about sex. And this is where I speak a little bit more to the ecstasy. No matter where you are in your journey of sexuality and getting to know your body, and even making intentional declarations of faith or courage or presence, there is still more. There is an unlimited amount of potential. And that part is the thing that I'm bringing to mind. Like, I didn't realize that women could be multi-orgasmic. Wasn't a thought for me until I had a conversation once and someone just matter-of-factly mentioned that, she had multiple. And I was like, wait, I was very familiar with my journey to getting to one and I was content. Wait, there's more? And then I don't even remember when or how, but slowly but surely I became a multi-orgasmic woman where that is like a big feat for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have had access to it if I didn't know that there could be potentially more. So that is what that part of it is about, which most people, they're like, oh, I want more there. But the book is structured where this is your journey. Like, I'm just talking about it, but I very much give you the questions to dig into your own story and find access to those conversations that will liberate and kind of take some of the taboo off of the conversation in general. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, let's excavate. Let's dig a little deeper into this multi-orgasmic situation that you are all up in here living the dream.
Yes.
What so for my experience, like my first experience having an orgasm with a man was about 4 or 5 months after my exploitation started, after I was being sex trafficked. And it was not a welcome event. I will tell you that. It was like, it was a bad situation. And I was on the bed and the man went down on me, which was a real trigger trauma for me because my first rape began in a similar fashion. And I had an orgasm and it just threw me for a loop. And I was so mad at my body, so angry because I felt betrayed, right? Because this is something I wasn't supposed to be enjoying. This was a job. This was something I was doing to make money. This was something I was doing because, I had a pimp hanging nooses around my neck at the time. And so, I went on after that. And I didn't have another orgasm with a human for years after that, right? Because sex was a job. It was not something that I enjoyed. And it was also a biological need at certain times, right? But then I'd get into the act of it and my body would shut down during it. And so the first time that I experienced multiple orgasms during sex, I think I was around 22, 24. And I had a boyfriend. He was my first long-term relationship. And I contribute my ability to have multiple orgasms to the fact that I felt safe with him. the fact that there was trust. And I think that's something that we also don't talk about enough, is that when we feel safe with our partners, we allow our bodies to respond in a different way. And, we had brought some toys into the bedroom. We had a vibrator, and the amount of orgasms, I had 3 orgasms before he'd even had one, and they were all at different times. And it was mind blowing. It was shocking. It was like, whoa, I did not know that was even a possibility.
Exactly.
During what? How can we replicate that?
Yes.
So that was my first experience with it. How was your response, and how did you learn to bring your body to that level of ecstasy?
So like I said, I don't even remember when it happened, but you spoke on it, the comfort part. So in the journey of having the conversation, I learned to ask myself, why? What is happening? With my husband, the level of trust there is consistent, and it's been building over the years. Like, we've been married for 8 years now, but in terms of like our sex journey, or even how I'm experiencing it, there wasn't any threat there. Right? Like, prior to having even my first orgasm, the thing that held me back was the threat of being disheveled, or like not having it together, because being neat was my goal, don't get out of sorts. Yeah. Vulnerability. Like, that was the whole threat. And that was part of what made me kind of hold it together. Like, I am a very headstrong person. And so when it comes to my abilities physically, and I didn't realize that everyone can't do this, but like, I can determine how I feel. And it's really interesting. Like, I'm a very ticklish person. If I decide that I'm not going to be ticklish, I can stop it.
Wow.
And that was like profound. Like, wait, everyone can't stop it? Like,
that willpower.
Yeah. I can stop it. Like, I can be falling all over the place and flailing. If I decide I'm not going to be ticklish, I can do that. So just imagine how my mind works in terms of sex. And you think about, you've seen like movies where people walk on coals, walk on fire. They cut themselves, do all types of things, and they do not have the response that you would anticipate they have. So for me with sex, same thing. Like, if my goal was to be neat, what I'm not about to do is squirm around this bed like a worm. I'm not going to do it, And that also was like, my body was like, you're right, we're not. So when I decided, like, you know what? You could be a little worm, see what happens, try it out. Like, when I tried to kind of discover how to let loose a little bit, that was where the first orgasm was welcome. Moving forward, when I learned of the possibility, it was the idea of not retreating when that was accomplished. So what my husband and I share in terms of our connection, I realized that it was safe to, live in that space. But after I had gotten my goal accomplished, instead of fully retreating, to just stay there. So a woman's body, your heart rate, your blood flow, like everything that's going on within you at the point of orgasm, it doesn't immediately just go away. Now, you can make it, you know what I'm saying? You can just, okay, wrap it up, we're done. And you can leave that space, but you can also stay in that space. Reside in that point of safety. And for me, in that place of love and dedication to one another and what we had. So to just reside there instead of fully retreating, that gave me access to continue forward. And so that's what I learned to do. And that's what I kind of gave myself permission to do. Even in my interviews, I ask women, when does sex end? 9 times out of 10 is when he cannot maintain his erection. That was the answer. Oh yeah, it's over when he goes soft. It's over when. So the majority of women who I was speaking to, their understanding of the sex journey was when his body says no.
Oh, I was totally going to bring that up. I'm so glad you came there. I was going to say, like, for so many of us, or at least the circles that I have moved in, sex becomes more about how do I please my partner and less about how do I please myself. And so
Absolutely.
we spend this whole time in the bedroom, do I look okay? Like, how does that feel for him? Like, is he hitting the right angle? And like, oh, he hasn't come yet. So maybe I should like push him to be a little better or farther or faster along. And, like, and then like you said, that was a skill. I mean, that's a skill set for prostitution, or sex workers or sex trafficking
Mhm.
is, when he's done, it's like, yo, man, this man's paying me to get out
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
be gone because
That
sex
is
is
the end.
over.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so learning to stay and what you said, not to retreat. Like, girl, I can't even tell you how shy I have gotten in the past with partners where it's like, oh, the sex is done. Fuck, you want to do what? You want to talk? You want to cuddle? Like, you want to know me? Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, back up.
Yeah.
That- that's way too intimate.
Yeah.
Like, that is not
Wait,
what
there is
sex
an
is
expectation
about.
beyond me being erect? Like that's not a
Yeah.
thing.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. So how do you stay present? How do you keep yourself or talk yourself from retreating?
Well, I have done an intentional process of being knowledgeful of my presence
Mm,
in the process. Like we both come to the table and we are equal shareholders in this process. So with me intentionally dismantling the part that like it is all about him, or
mhm,
even the mastery of being a good lay. Like I
mhm.
mastered being good at performing
Yeah.
long before I even thought about myself. Even as like a young girl, I was a cheerleader from the age of 8 all the way through high school. I love cheerleading, first of all. I that's my thing. But even like I'm long, long, long ago, I learned how to be looked at,
Mhm.
how to be perceived, how to engage attention. Like
How to
all
be
that
seen.
stuff, I became very familiar with that language.
Yeah.
So even entering into my sex life or even entering into like my sexuality, I was all about putting on the show.
Mhm.
I really studied the art of being good to be with. But
Yes.
then on the flip side, I didn't have a clue about what I was even looking for.
Right.
So I had to train myself to like almost, it may sound weird, but I trained myself how to be selfish because I couldn't find any other language that would validate or even like keep me in the game.
Right.
So like, no, be selfish with it. Like get yours. And somewhere in that language, it allowed me to simply just stay in the game, to engage more forward as opposed to just performing or
Mm,
just taking what was given. It engages me to like speak, you know, ask for what I want and deny what I didn't, and stay in a moment of something that I never have seen before. I think that was one of the most beautiful things. Like my husband has always been very supportive of like, no, I want to be with you. I want you to communicate with me. I want you to experience this the way that I'm experiencing it.
mm,
So I gave myself permission. He gave me permission to engage in some things that were not necessarily demonstrated to me.
right.
If you like the way your chin is tickled and you just want some chin tickle for 30 minutes, who's going to tickle anyone's chin for 30 minutes? But that's what you like. You can totally put that into your sex life.
Mhm.
That was the permission that was not it was absent really. Like go for it, like listen to your body, you engage, like give yourself permission to engage in the ways that feel good to you. The agreements that you and your partner have, oftentimes in abuse, the agreements are that I am in submission to you.
Right.
The agreement is that you are in power. So with that agreement at place, there isn't much room for the other party to be an equivalent in making a request or creating what we share. So
Mhm.
that's the part that like I was able to adopt and really get familiar with in taking my seat at the table and both of us creating agreements as opposed to the societal norms that I had conformed to concerning my sex life and my body.
Wow. So powerful.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's been a journey. I think that the more difficult part with this whole conversation is like the religious part.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need to be able to have conversations, even if we don't necessarily agree, just to be able to talk. Like on Clubhouse, we came in and I was talking to some people who were sharing their experiences being trafficked or some of the traumas that they've experienced. The biggest thing that I gained was being able to listen to someone else's story.
Mm-hmm.
If we cannot even listen, then how are we going to be even able to give ourselves permission to speak?
I agree with you there. I do find that there's a difference between speaking and projecting when you're talking about your
Yeah,
experience.
that's true.
And I think that's one of the things that I struggle with is, when we walk into Clubhouse, just in general, I do think that there's a time when people need to sit with their feelings and a therapist and a counselor and have a team of people around them to help them process their experience, and so that they can learn to assign of their own volition from their own emotional reservoir and develop a language that encompasses their truth. And I think that, people's truths can change. And so oftentimes what I see is I see people speaking out publicly very early on in the process where they're crying and they are in a place of either fear or rage, anger, and that
Distress, yeah.
sometimes people come along who haven't experienced or who haven't lived that moment with them, and they project assumption onto that conversation, and it stokes the fire, right? This indignant, just I don't know what the word is, but there's a word I'm searching for, but it's so darn early in the morning. I've only had one cup of coffee. But just this rage on behalf of that person, and so it stokes the fire. It's like putting more kindling on an already raging inferno, right? It just adds to it. And so I really do believe that, yes, we need to sit and we need to listen, but we also need to remember that the people that are speaking reserve the right to view their story from a different point, from a different perspective, from a different version of who they are, an expanded version of themselves as they move through the process of their healing journey. And too often what I see is people getting trapped in the narrative that brought them to the table, but then that is foisted onto them by the surrounding parties. And so people speak, I believe, openly now sometimes in public settings a little bit early, and then they end up getting trapped in that. We speak a lot to that with the human trafficking people. We speak a lot to that about how organizations facilitate a lot of that and stuff. And so, yeah, I think that one of the most important parts that you mentioned about listening is listening while remembering that this person is only they're at one checkpoint, and that their perspective might change tomorrow. They might review that and go with that. And so I think that not trying to sit and listen without judgment and meeting people where they are, I do believe that that's one of the hardest things that another person can do, because we tend to filter somebody's language through our experiences, and they might not yet have the language that matches our experience. And so we project onto them that which we think is what they meant to say. You know what I mean?
I do. Yes, all of that. I think the difficult part is we are not taught how to navigate boundaries.
Oh, I love boundaries. Boundaries. Yes, boundaries win.
So even in conversation, we're just ill-equipped, like even as, like, of course I've said, I'm a believer, I'm a Christian. even as a minister of sorts, I'm not sitting here in this podcast trying to convert you. We're talking about the topic. And then there is also this idea that someone in my shoes, at some point, I'm going to lead you in the sinner's prayer. You know, I have to get you on over here. But if the foundation of my faith is love, the love that guides me, that is my philosophy for life, is very understanding that you have a lived experience and you have choices. They are yours to make. Even as I believe that God desires for all of us to live our best lives, part of that is we still have a choice. You can choose however you want to live. So why wouldn't you have a choice about talking about your sex or your sexuality? Why wouldn't you have a choice about, okay, what I'm about to share right now and what I'm not, what I have experienced and what I haven't? Like, there's so many narratives that are common that people don't even know how to navigate the conversation because the narratives are so loud. It's been preached over and over again. A woman's value is, what's between her legs. Don't give it away to too many people. Don't be a whore. Don't be this. Don't be that. But then what do you say to the girl who didn't give it? It was stolen. And the narrative is your value is the sex that you are not having. Yet I've had tons of sex and none of it was at my choice. What do you say to her?
Exactly.
She needs to know that she has the power to engage in the conversation, and she is not reduced to just sex because there is more to us as individuals.
I fucking love that you just brought that up, because this is a conversation that I've been having in my head. And please bear with me because I literally have not spoken about this out loud. So I'm going to be trying to process it and speak about it at the same time. And it's going to be very disjointed.
Let's do it.
We're
here.
Okay. Let's get through this. Okay. So this is the conversation. This is why I advocate for the decriminalization of sex work, because number one, it just makes sense to me that people need to be safer. But that's, I mean, if you're in on that conversation, you're in on that conversation, you're a lot safer if you have laws that protect you and the same laws that apply. Decriminalizing sex work does not mean a man can rape you. It does not mean that a man can sell you. It does not mean that you are going to go to jail kind of idea if you don't give, say, a police officer or somebody in a position of power what they're demanding of you, because there's no more leverage there, right? And it's like that doesn't make pimping legal, and it doesn't it means that you can go to the hospital if you've been raped, and even if you're a sex worker, they don't go, oh, well, you're a sex worker, you had it coming, right? And so that's why I'm for the decriminalization of it, because it makes it safer to receive help. It makes it safer to speak up and say, hey, I didn't agree to this kind of idea. So that's why I'm for decriminalization. Now, here's the thing. When we this is just my opinion. This is just, like I said, I'm trying to work it out as I'm speaking. When we tell girls who have been exploited that you are a victim, that you did not want this, that you did not bring this in, that you are a victim. And yet we tell women who have engaged in prostitution that you're a whore and that that's bad and that you are not deserving of protection. But you have a person who's been exploited, and then as a result of biochemistry, neurochemistry, behavioral patterning, and survival, who has gone from being exploited to exploiting herself as a means of survival. You're also inadvertently saying, unless you fit the narrative and you call yourself a victim over here, we will not respect you and you are not worthy of redemption, because we do not allow for sex workers and whores, because you are a bad woman if you engaged in this. And so to me, that really cross-pollinated with what you just said about, a young woman who didn't ask for it, but doesn't necessarily have the space to be okay with what happened to her, because we've decreed that, to be a wanton whore is a bad thing. To know your body is a bad thing. To be in the driver's seat and be able to make that choice, be it a good choice or a bad choice, or a choice that resulted in consequences, is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you navigate that? How do you impress upon our youth, our children, our next generation? How do you impress upon them that, ultimately you are not bad for wanting to explore this or experience this, and but there are consequences to actions. But at the same time, we learn from wisdom, and wisdom is often found through making errors in judgment and or perceiving an experience to be good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we remain unjudgmental when we have these subconscious biases, these attitudes, these belief systems that keep us indentured to the past and take the mic away from me, because I'm just
no, but you
I'm
hit
just
it
flummoxed
right.
now.
You hit it right on the head in that changing the language, discussing it as a choice. Simply that. Discussing it as a choice then opens up opportunity for conversation to connect with your why you do certain things or why you don't. You know what I'm saying? That is the strength of the conversation. If we implement this idea of choice, then children, adults, whoever, you become a stakeholder in what happens, as opposed to just fully consenting to what has happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Just shifting the narrative. Even with decriminalizing sex work, the reason why that hasn't happened is because in keeping it criminalized, we can separate the consumers and also keep the money flowing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have sex trafficking circles or people consuming or requesting sex for pleasure, even paying for it, that money is not taxed. That money, you can strike a deal, you can do certain things. Like there's all this whole other world that is not regulated. And also the power remains in the hands of the powers that be. Sure, a woman, I guess, could be a pimp, and sure, she could, have the power, but that's not the most common scenario. If sex work was decriminalized, there could be regulations in place and conversations that challenge the norm. There could be perhaps a union that ensures the safety of those who are choosing that lifestyle.
Boom.
There could be
we unionize that
accountability. Yes, there could be accountability. Not saying like, let's put a commercial and advertise this, because the fear of decriminalizing it is also considering maintaining the silence.
Mm-hmm.
No, we can't decriminalize it. People are going to get, girl, these people are doing this anyway.
Exactly.
This is happening anyway. So like the accountability and also the access to that conversation and that power shift, there is a opportunity for the parties involved to take a seat at the table. Women do not have to just receive it or just be abused or just take what they're given. Like the narrative can be shifted. People can choose, because women aren't the only ones being trafficked and are not empowered. Like there is a point where us not having this conversation is causing so much more damage in a world full of information, in a world full of, messages being thrown at us. And if we don't have the opportunities to think, oh, wait, now what am I doing with this information? What am I filtering it through? Even in terms of, myself and my faith and the things that I choose to do. Okay, I'm a monogamous woman. I'm choosing to be with one person. It's not that I have to be with him. I'm choosing to, because my proclamation of faith, because of our dedication to one another, our agreement to walk this life together. If it's fed to me like this is your only choice, it weakens the actual love that's taking place. It weakens the message and the agreement that we have made. I'm not just with you because I have to. And if I do other things, I'm a whore. That's not the message. There is power in me choosing to be with you. There's power in me choosing, in you choosing, and us agreeing. If we looked at things that way, think of like all the relationships. Like I talked to a woman yesterday. She said she doesn't know a woman that wasn't cheated on or hasn't been cheated on. So her narrative is like, oh, all women get cheated on. This is part of the walk. And she asked me if I knew any. And I said, yeah, I know a lot of different women with a lot of different stuff going on. But like, what if the narrative was shifted that way? Where we all are conscious of, no. The biggest act of love and the biggest act of power is to be conscious of the fact that there is a choice there. That shifts things in a healthy way. That shifts things where you can ask questions that further align with your values or not. But that's there for you. That's an option. Whereas to a lot of people have never even conceived of the fact that you have and play a role in the very decisions that you make.
I love that you brought that up. That is, I mean, I speak to this quite often. That's what got me through my experience. And that's what brought me so much joy in my life, was just taking accountability for what happened to me and owning it. And don't get me wrong, I was silenced by shame for, 20 plus years after it happened, but I just always assumed responsibility for what had happened to me. And I think that if I would have laid down and accepted everyone else's version of my story, of my truth, that I never would have accomplished all that I was able to during those years, and so I love that you brought up choice and accountability and the responsibility. And I just want to take this opportunity to shift and involve boys and men in the conversation, because this is I'm not well versed in the and if I botch this and I have someone who's listening who is offended by what I say, I apologize. Please reach out and educate me on it, because I'm always open to learning. But on the LGBTQ plus community, again, I'm a straight woman. I've experienced, I experimented when I was younger, especially after I exited sex trafficking and men felt so threatening to me. I experienced relationships with other women, but I can't speak to what it's like for a young man who, be it gay or straight, coming out. Again, the conversation around it, around sex, around expectations, around, what is and isn't okay, and the language in itself, how to speak to their experiences and how to speak to their windows or opportunities of education about themselves and their rights and their choices. I mean, that's something that you must encounter quite a bit as a teacher, and also now as an author and a, I want to say leader, but I also want to say researcher was the word I was searching for, of sexual consent and sexual ecstasy.
Yeah. So I've made it a point to focus on women just as, the core of the conversation, because that was the most, that was a place where the most conversation, needed to be had for me in this angle. But the aspect of men is interesting because there is a lot more liberty in conversation and culture for them than for the women that I've, seen in terms of abuse and, the LGBT community. There is a big gap between information there because, now what, right? Like what? Okay. So women, the power shift is very much clear, or at least is very loud, that men kind of hold this power position, and that women, may or may not engage in sex or even the sexual experience in a certain way. But when it comes to, the LGBT community and with men, when we talk about sexual abuse or violence or even pleasure, that's an even bigger gap, I think, because the access to conversation is even further restricted. Like, this is the narrative. And then if you don't fit inside of that narrative, then what? But then it goes back to the access to just the idea of, okay, we can choose what conversation we engage in. Like there is access for us to do research and even define norms. So if you don't do what everybody else is doing, or if something has happened to you, you can simply ask a question without having the taboo be assigned to you. And the fact of the matter is that the conversation isn't safe really for many people, which is why we don't have them. Like I do some sex coaching with women, and immediately when I first started, what I found is that, first of all, the people who have found me are 1 degree of separation away. These are people who I have access to. They're not, the deeper strangers yet. And, I imagine that one day that will be the thing. But part of it is like still this level of protection and security. I can't just go out to some stranger and seek help. And so the same thing, like as you're asking about the men and boys, or even people in the LGBT community, they already have to protect themselves from all the things that say that they shouldn't be who they are, or all the things that are related to the actions that they do or don't do. So then how do I engage with the conversation? Like there is this idea that you're not supposed to. And so that either further perpetuates what is happening or creates a whole different narrative that, can be guided by simply having access to safe conversation within you being able to make choices and engage in a place of, I have the right to have this conversation. I have a seat at my table. I hear all this going on around me, but my choices are informed choices. I don't just have to engage with what's given to me or even the perception of others, but like what I deliberately choose to do is also a part of this conversation. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And to your point, like, because I focus on women, I often don't even speak about men or LGBT community as much, because there are layers to the conversation that I have yet to really engage in, like a lot of things are the same. And even like talking about just having access to the conversation or, making your choices, those things can go both ways. But I think there may be some layers to this conversation that I have yet to tap on.
No, I love it. I love that, you're open to even having that discussion with me. Because again, when we're outside of our area of expertise, it can be overwhelming and daunting, much the same way people approach the conversation about sex, right? And so we're just branching off, kind of trying to have a conversation without being experts in that area and trying to develop a language, And so, what would you give people as far as like an actionable tool for language? Where do you begin with children? How do you start having that conversation? What is some language tools that you give to the people around you so that they can begin to explore even deeper and feel confident in their ability to engage?
That's good. I think for children, I allow them to lead the conversation. So based on their level of inquiry, their ability to express themselves, I would meet them there. So for the most part, even with my 4-year-old, anatomy seems to be the place we're at, and she'll say like, oh, I know while all people are not binary, but like, that's a girl, that's a boy, or, the use of pronouns, like she hasn't started to read yet, but like she's very much into characters and pronouns, just identifying the world around her, trying to make sense of things. And then, now we're, she's potty trained. She has a younger sister. We changed diapers. And she's like, oh, mommy has a vagina. Sister has a vagina. Daddy doesn't have vagina. No, he doesn't. No, daddy has a penis. He doesn't have vaginas. You know what I'm saying? So like that part of the conversation, just really normalizing the anatomy part. For each individual, I would say, ask the why. Just simply ask yourself why. And then in that, you'll start to dig into some other layers of your story, of your lived experience that you may not have before. Sometimes we just take things as they are because that's the way it's always been. So, and we don't
Yeah.
take it any further. No, ask yourself why. Even something as simple as how your body works. Sensations are really interesting from person to person. What gives me a certain shock may not necessarily mean anything to you.
Mm-hmm.
So you follow your own experience. If you have, I don't know, a funny bone, you hit your elbow. Ow, why did that happen? Well, where did I feel it? Why? I wonder why that, what I'm saying? Like, follow your
Yeah.
own whys. And then when it comes down to deeper levels of like choice and, deeper levels of commitments, some foundational things that you deliberately do, you can trace your whys to those things and then decide like, oh yes, this is what I do and I'm going to continue to, or you may make a decision to shift it. But this gives you access. Like, you don't just get to take life as it's given to you. You can be an active participant in your life. So the conversation essentially is like, why am I experiencing what I am experiencing? And that will lead you to all types of conversations within yourself. And then you can decide yet again how to take it to someone else. And if you will, you may discover something, you want to inquire about it with a physician. Let me see what's going on with this. You may discover, like, even through my interviews, a lot of women we've come across various, medical situations that are common. And, you've been dealing with the symptoms for years. You just didn't know it was a thing because you never talked about it, So, like, immediately after talking, I can identify certain conditions. Does this happen? Does this happen? Oh, you may have PCOS. Maybe ask a doctor about that. Oh, this is happening. This, you may have higher levels of testosterone that affects your sex drive. This way. Ask your doctor about this. You may have low iron. Like, I start to get familiar very much with someone's story based off of what they're telling me, and they go to the doctor. Sure enough, this is occurring. I have frequent yeast infections. I don't know. Oh, this is what you do. Like, there's so many things that now give you the opportunity to address them. But you wouldn't even know that that was medical if you didn't have the opportunity to evaluate it and think of it in that way. So, like, conversation first is with yourself and just like, okay, what is my why, or what is happening? And now what am I going to do with that?
I love it. I love it. Let's give our listeners one more actionable step, which is, how can they get your book, and how can they get in touch with you, and where can they follow you at, so that they can continue to learn about themselves and bring their questions, into consciousness, so that they can address maybe some unanswered curiosities that they didn't know they had?
That's a really good question. So my book is available on my website. It's jocelynmkirkland.com. And once it sells out there, then we will launch on Amazon, and you can find it there for as long as it will be there. Also on Instagram, my name is the same, Jocelyn M Kirkland, and you can direct message me. I am available to talk. If I can help even one person's life, if I can inspire, even provide hope to just one person, that means the world to me, because we are all rippling effects on one another. Even for the abusers or people who are inflicting perhaps sexual exploitation or even causing some type of harm in a way to other people, they still came from somewhere. They learned some stuff that enabled them to make that kind of impact on other people. So if they are trying to unlearn, or if they are learning about what they're ultimately causing or perpetuating, we can stop it. Or we can inflict, we can change it. So if you want to reach out to me, I am here, and I plan to be here for as long as I can to help as many people as I can.
Oh, I love, you just brought up, sorry. I thought we was going to come to a close, but girl, you said something and I'm just like, no, wait, rewind. I love that you brought that up. I am a big believer. I mean, with all my heart, I believe that unless we're including, sorry, my dog is trying to get my attention. I don't know if you can hear her just squeaking away in the back. She's like, oh, you just said, Hi. Anyway, babe, yeah, don't wag your tail at me. Love you. Please stop. I think that when we don't include people who have exploited and or abused, either directly or indirectly, the people within their, please stop. I know you want my attention, but just give me a second. Okay. We're almost done. When we don't include them in the conversation and offer them the space to address their own issues, their own complex reasons and drives that, the average person doesn't know about, that we're actually doing ourselves a disservice, because we are further heaping shame and stigmatism, fear and disgust onto people. And as a result, they're having to withdraw from seeking out the help out of that fear, out of consequence, out of, and I just think that takes us further and further away from providing real tangible help and or solutions and or an end to the behaviors that are harming them and the people around them.
Mm-hmm. If we don't invite them to the conversation, we're inadvertently forcing them to be there.
Yes. Oh, see, you're so eloquent about it. I'm just like spitting out like bleh, bleh, and you're just like streamline that. Thank you.
It's true.
Love it.
It's
beautiful.
True. We have to enter like it, and even as we talk, everything that we've talked about has come back to the conversation component. Mm-hmm. Like in my adventure of writing the book, there were several angles that I could have taken, and even people like, of course, they make the requests, tips and tricks, tell me how to do it, this, that, and other. I'm like, yeah, we'll get there. There's a place for that. Yeah. But if we just create a table of conversation, we'll find that access to all of those conversations now increases. If there is someone who is conducting themselves and they're looking at themselves in the mirror, wait, I'm on the wrong side of this table. Giving them access to the conversation interrupts the trajectory of it being continued and also taught and safely snug in the silence that has produced it in the first place. When I know we're out of time, but
no, we're not. No, keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
In the process of research for the book, one of the things I did was went to a Sex Addicts Anonymous class that was open. And I was like, I need to be in the room. I want to hear the stories. I want to take a seat at this table and just kind of see or hear what's happening. What I anticipated was not what I experienced. I was anticipating like some deeper, darker, more foreign stuff to be said. Like, oh, the creeps are really coming in now. This is what I'm thinking. You know what I'm saying? Like I was thinking the rapists and the scary people and all this stuff. I don't know what I was truly anticipating, but it wasn't what I experienced. In the room were people. There were people.
Yes.
Neighbors, cousins, grandparents, people, teachers, police officers, people who you assign a certain level of dignity or, cleanliness or neatness, if you will, like, what is grandpa doing here? Married for decades, a responsible pillar of the community whose retirement is at stake because financially he is given a lot of his money to sex work that is not public. You know what I'm saying? Like you wouldn't anticipate him consuming, but nonetheless, this is his challenge. He doesn't know how he's going to reconcile the fact that he has spent their money. His wife's livelihood in their latter years is going to be drastically different because he's been seeking this conversation in different ways for years. So here he is in the latter part of his life, spilling out his beans and really just trying to find a way to connect with people concerning what he's been experiencing sexually and the fact that is not desired. He just doesn't have the ability to make the choices that he wants to. He came with shame. He wasn't proud. You know, it wasn't the presentation that you would think like, but this is his experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat in conversation and empathy and the wonder of, wow, yeah, this is one of the narratives. Like, we need to grant everyone access to healthy and safe conversation. We can't just leave it at what should or shouldn't be happening, because not all narratives are the same. So, yes, everyone needs a seat at the table. Everyone needs to be able to speak about sex, understand anatomy. Because if we don't open up that conversation, then this silence continues to lead and produce unwanted effects that we have to then heal from. That then we have to figure out how to address it. And we already weren't talking to begin with.
Yeah.
But now what do we do with the effects of it?
Mm.
No. We're not just going to sit with this torture. You know, the love that we speak of in religious circles or in terms of God, how do we reconcile on the end of this? People on the receiving end, what do you do now with this pain? What are you going to tell me about this situation here? Where was the love initially?
Mm.
And the answer is that it's always been there. We just act like it's not. Or we shield ourselves from the conversation for fear that it will produce some deeper sin or some heavier ugly or some more dangerous, result that is happening whether we talk about it or not. Every individual has purpose on this world that we can't quite articulate. We did not create ourselves. No one was like, Mom and Dad, go ahead and get me here. We just kind of popped up. There's purpose in every individual. We all are worthwhile. We all have a special place in this world. Every literal grain of sand in the doggone beach by the coast, there are tons. Each of them has a purpose, because without every single one, the coast doesn't even exist.
Mm.
There is no beach without each individual grain of sand. As insignificant as it can seem, it still makes a hell of a difference. Every person matters. Every person has opportunity to experience love and worthiness. But one of the biggest things that I've heard in relation to sex, or even like people who are experiencing questions about their existence, is that I don't matter. I am alone. Why does it matter? If God cares so much, then he wouldn't have let this happen. Or if this happened, if there are all these things related to the fact of we're convinced of our insignificance. And that is not true. I don't care who you are, where you're from. Every single person, every grain of sand matters in existence while we are here. And that is why we're here.
Oh, you are a force to be reckoned with. My little heart is just going pitter patter, pitter patter. I'm telling you, you just inspired the shit out of me. Because I myself have had those daunting feelings of insignificance. Like, I think that I don't know a single person who hasn't, and you just spoke right to my heart. And I just got all the warm feels and the fuzzies. So thank you. Seriously, from the bottom of my heart. From the expansion of my heart, not even the bottom. There is no bottom. From the expansion
the whole heart
of my heart.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank
oh
you.
my God. What a pleasure.
And then this is a whole grain of sand effect, right? Because even as you thank me, I'm also conscious of the fact that you created this platform. We're together in this moment, and whoever is listening to this, girl, I'm excited about the fact that someone that I will never meet, my little Black Christian self in America, is going to have someone out here in the world hearing my words because you took the time to do what? Have conversation with me. We all matter. We all matter. And if conversations restrict that idea, then we lose. Or we're convinced that we don't have some role to play in this whole system. And we do. We do. So for that, I'm grateful. Thank you for having me. And to all those who are out there listening, You matter. And you need to talk about sex too.
All the goods, the bad, and the ugly.
That's right.
That's right. Thank you so much. Everybody listening, we are going to have all of Jocelyn's contact information in the show notes. And to all our listeners who joined us here today, we are so grateful for you. We adore you. I love it when you guys reach out. It means the world to me. And we hope that you continue to show up for yourself and for the conversation and, ultimately for a better world. So we will talk to you soon. And I'm going to go and get your book because now you've got me curious. So
yes.
Woo, thank you so much.
We'll talk again after you read it, because I know that your questions and like the conversation will shift a little bit. And
Okay, let's do it. Let's definitely do it. I'm going to get on that, and then we're going to have you back, and then I'm going to have like 600 hours of notes, and we're just going to get right into it. I love it. So excited. So excited. Thank you so much once again. Disclaimer. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not necessarily reflect the opinions or viewpoints of the host, producer, other guests, or sponsors. I, Rayanne K. Irving, am not, nor have I ever been, a doctor or therapist, and none of what I say is intended for professional or medical advice.